Thank you so much for attending the 30th anniversary of the Tampa Bay Times Festival of Reading. My name is Annika Kieler. I am the Director of Development and Community Relations at the Times. Isn't it great that we can be together today to share and celebrate our love for reading? Yeah. The festival brings us together today, as it has for 3 decades, as a community who value meaningful storytelling. Words that transform and transport us. Words that unite us. At the Tampa Bay Times, we are big fans of the power of words to engage, inform, and connect. Your attendance and enthusiasm at this event today makes a huge difference. Proceeds from the Times Festival of Reading supports the Tampa Bay Times Journalism Fund. The financial support our newsroom receives from our philanthropic funds, in addition to the support from our subscribers and advertisers, ensures that the Tampa Bay Times can continue to serve you with news, information, and community events like this one today that you can rely on. So thank you for being here today. And to our donors, subscribers, and advertisers in the audience today, thank you so much for investing in an informed community. If anyone has any questions or would like to know more about our philanthropic arm, please reach out. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And now, please join me in welcoming back to the stage Tampa Bay Times rock star and book critic Colette Bancroft and our featured and best-selling author Dennis Lehane.
Thank you so much, Annika, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to see you all back. I hope you all got some lunch. Let me introduce Dennis Lehane, and I had to, write down some of your resume because it's too long to...
Okay.
Dennis Lehane grew up in Boston. 4 of his 12 best-selling novels, Live by Night, Mystic River, Gone Baby Gone, and Shutter Island, were adapted into films, and a 5th, The Drop, was adapted by Lehane himself. He was a staff writer on the HBO series The Wire and worked as a writer-producer on Boardwalk Empire and Bloodline. He was writer-producer on the television adaptations of 3 Stephen King novels, Mr. Mercedes, End of Watch, and The Outsider. And he spent the last 2 years, he says, playing hard to get with COVID and creating the limited series Black Bird for Apple+. He's an alumnus of Eckerd College in St. Petersburg and co-founded its annual Writers in Paradise conference. But he's here today for the first time in 5 years to talk about a book. His newest book, Small Mercies, will be published in April. And I want to let all of you know right now that although you can't buy the book today, you can pre-order it through Tombola, and when it's published, you'll get a signed copy. But I have read it, wow, it's terrific. But when we talked a couple of years ago, and at that point you hadn't had a novel for several years, and I asked you when you were going to write another book, and you said, I don't know if I ever will. And I cried a little bit, but you have. So what changed your mind? What made you write this book?
It's a very, I don't understand. One of my favorite lines is from Blood Meridian. Cormac McCarthy says, how's a man to know his own mind when his own mind is all he has to know it with? And so I don't understand my mind fully. I had a terrible time trying to write prose for 6 years, for 5 years, let me say. And then I went down to Louisiana to run a television show. The first time I ran a television show, soup to nuts. Everything went wrong. The heat was ungodly. We had COVID outbreaks all the time. We had a hurricane hit. We had all sorts of other problems that go with running a $100 million production. And somehow, in all of that, I started writing a book. And it just flowed out. It just flowed out. And I think this was a very interesting thing to find out. People have said repeatedly to me throughout my entire career, "You're so light, why are your books so dark?" Right? Like, I'm a pretty African guy. And I've said, I don't know, it's the Flaubert thing about being, bourgeois and peaceful in your life so you can be violent and passionate in fiction. And, but when I wrote this book, something very strange happened. As I was finishing it, I have been dishonest with myself, I think, and probably with everybody around me, in that there is an enormous amount of rage that I've carried around inside of me that I put into my books. And it does not come from an abusive childhood. I didn't have an abusive childhood. I have great parents. It does not come from any incident I can point to. When I wrote this book, I finally understood. I was 9 years old when Boston federally desegregated its public schools, and the city exploded, absolutely exploded. And the racism that I had always found around me everywhere in a very quiet way was you couldn't pass it up. There were nooses hanging from fences. There were people being burned in effigy. There were signs that just said "N-word, go home," and they were back to Africa. And there were people chanting and screaming things, and I got stuck in the middle of a protest that turned into a riot when I was 9 years old. And I finally understood at 56 that the rage was that. That's what I've been angry at my entire life. I was 9 years old. I didn't have a racist bone in my body, and I was surrounded by racism. Everywhere. And that was not fair, I think. And it took me until I was 56 to hug my 9-year-old child and say, "You shouldn't have gone through that. You shouldn't have put up with that, period." And I think that's why the book felt like an exorcism. And I'm very proud of it. The book is about a woman who is a racist, alcoholic, chain-smoking project mother. And on the eve of busing, her 17-year-old daughter was about to be bused through the other side of the city to an African-American school. Disappears. And this woman, who has nothing left to lose, goes looking for her daughter. And it seems to be tied to a case in which an African-American man was either pushed, fell, or jumped in front of a train. And that's the book. There you go.
And I was, and you write about this in the foreword to the book, about your personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped you zero in on this setting. But it's not, the novel isn't autobiographical. In other words,
no.
9-year-old Dennis is not in the book.
9-year-old Dennis is not in the book.
Yeah.
No. Late 50s Dennis is very angrily
Yeah.
writing about it. But no, it's there was another thing that contributed to this book, which was there was a story in Mexico, came on the New York Times about a year ago, or 2 years ago actually. In Mexico, there was a woman whose daughter was killed by low-level drug members of the, I believe it was the Sinaloa cartel. And this woman single-handedly tracked down every single one of the people involved in her. These are all low-level guys. But she tracked down every single one of the people involved directly in her daughter's death. One of them she caught in the middle of a bazaar in Mexico and beat the ever-living shit out of him until the police showed up. And when they said to her, "Why are you doing this? The cartel has made it very clear that they will kill you." She said, because she was making news by this point, she said, "They took my heart. There's nothing else they can take from me." And she got all 4 guys. And in the end, she was assassinated leaving her house one morning. She got into her car. She didn't care. She won. And that was another big inspiration for this story. Mary Pat has nothing left in her life. She's lost her son to drugs after Vietnam. She's lost her husband to her own racism. She's lost everything. And now her daughter's gone. And there's that old line, beware when you take away everything somebody has because you give them nothing left to lose. And that's very much the book.
Yeah, she's an incredible character. She just, knocked me out. And it interested me that at the beginning of the book, and I wrote about this when I reviewed it, she seems like a character that's kind of standard in crime fiction. That is, the victim's mother or spouse or family member who is bereft and despairing and enraged, but helpless.
Yep.
And that person finds, the cop or the detective or whatever, and sets that person in motion.
Yeah, no, Mary Pat doesn't need no help.
She didn't need no help.
No.
And she's just an amazing character. And you mentioned that inspiration, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how you took that trope and just spun it around. If she and Jack Reacher were in the ring, I'd bet on her.
Yeah, she's an amalgam of a lot of women I knew growing up. I grew up in Dorchester, not South Boston, and right over the line was South Boston, but I was from Dorchester, very clear bifurcation. And the one thing that we were truly terrified of as kids growing up was selfie girls. My friend got his ass kicked by 3 selfie girls at a subway station, and nobody looked down on him for it. We were like, hey, you lived, selfie girls were just so tough and so feral. They would just, if they got mad, man, they would just kill you. They would just, they fight packs. And so I knew a lot of Southie moms and Dorchester moms who were I'm going to use a very offensive term, but it's the only term I can think of. They were just tough broads. It's the only time I've ever heard the word broad seem applicable. And it was just kind of like these chicks were just, they smoked, they drank, they spit. And if you messed with them, they would fuck you up. And so I wanted to write about that type of woman. And there's a scene very early in the book. I was going to read from it today, but then we decided not to. And she's in a bar and she's talking to the boyfriend of her daughter who's missing, and he backtalks her in a bar, and she damn near beats him to death. And when the guys pull her off him, she's like, as she's being pulled off, and she knows she's in trouble because it's a mob bar, and as they're pulling her off, she can't resist kicking him a couple of times. She's like, well, my legs are free, so she kicks him a few times. That's there's a moment in the book where somebody asks the police officer, who is important in the book, but he's secondary to her, and somebody says to the police officer, how do you explain her? And he says, nobody ever told her how to quit. Nobody even told her it was an option. And that's who she is. And that's, again, you take everything from this woman, God help you. And that's what I wanted to. The other thing I would say is a big influence on this book would be, I don't know if any of you know the film. I'm not going to tell you. It's not the book. I can't take credit for the book, but the film Get Carter with Michael Caine in the late '60s or early '70s was a big influence. And Get Carter is about a guy who returns home because his daughter is his brother has committed suicide, and he returns home to Manchester, in England, and he's an enforcer for the mob. And he begins to look into his brother's death, and he's cold and he's vicious. And the point of the movie is that if it gets to his morality, then it's really bad. And that's the point of Get Carter, is that when Michael Caine finally comes to the moment where it's even repulsing him, you're like, this is evil. And I was kind of driving towards that with this book as well.
Yeah, the scene you mentioned in the bar, which is the scene where she sort of pivots from what I thought she was to what she really was. And you do that in a sentence. And I just about jumped out of my chair when I read it. It was So good.
Thank you. I knew when I sat down to write, that was the first scene I was going towards.
Was it?
Yeah, I was like, she's gonna beat the shit out of me.
And normally in books, I don't revel in people having the shit beat out of them.
Right.
But in this one,
He had it coming.
yeah,
He had it coming.
and if again, very bad.
Yeah, she's. There's a line in the book that I really love. She gave me great lines.
Yeah.
There's some of that characters, they just talk to you.
Yeah.
You know. So there was a line where the cops are interviewing her, and then they say, "Please make sure you contact us if your daughter contacts you." And she nods, and the cop says, "Are you nodding as if you agree with us?" And she says, "I'm not. I'm nodding as in I heard the words that left your mouth." And then there's a moment where somebody says to her, "You should know we're not the kind of guys you can ask questions of. After all these years, you should know that." And she says, "After all these years, you should know that I'm not the kind of person who gives a shit about what you think I should know."
It's interesting too in this book that in many of your earlier books, you've written about the mom. And the Irish mob, the Italian mob, you know, and written about them where they were kind of centered characters,
Yeah.
the mobsters themselves. And we've talked, I think, about, you know, that gangster character in American myth, that it's, you know, and in this book, we get Mary Pat's kind of point of view of them. They're terrible people, and they do terrible things, but they're kind of diminished in a way.
The mobsters, or
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you know, I think it's very clear. Anybody who reads this book and knows anything about Boston history is going to know exactly what based these mobsters on. And several of the things that happen in this book are based on real cases. So I'll bring up British crime film again. Here's what I like about British crime film over American crime film. In British crime films, the gangsters are all nasty. They're just nasty. They got yellow teeth. They got no class. They'll kill you as soon as look at you. They're not like the romanticized gangsters we do in American films. They're scary. I wanted that vibe here. This is dirty, small, and scary. This is what it was like to be in Whitey Bulger's orbit in the 70s and the 80s. It was grimy, and it was everywhere. It was pervasive.
Yeah, and that's another thing that really comes across in the book, that the people in that neighborhood, you know, it pervades everybody's lives. It's not just this crime happening off to the side. It's, you know, Mary Pat's son dying of drugs that came from that gang. And, you know, and everybody's life is touched and affected and restricted by what they do. And that really comes through.
Oh, good. This is great, getting you all excited for a book you can't read for 6 months.
Pre-order today. And to segue into the other thing that you've been doing, is Small Mercies going to be a TV series, and are you going to write it?
We're in negotiation.
Yeah.
But yes, if the problem is to find somebody who could play Mary Pat is really hard. I've narrowed it to 2 actresses.
Have you?
And that's it.
Can you tell us?
I think only Amy Adams and Charlize Theron could play her. That's it. And Charlize would have to really de-glam.
Yeah.
She'd have to lose, you know, she'd have to gain a bunch of weight. She'd have to de-glam. Probably some fake teeth, you know what I mean? Because Mary Pat is described very early in the book as not a, she's not a lookout, as we'd say.
Well, I think at one point you described her as built for battle.
She's built for battle, yes. She looks like I think the line is, Mary Pat, when she was 6, looked like she was built for the roller derby or some such shit. That's one of the lines, yeah.
But you're right, either one of them would be good. And the book has that cinematic quality, certainly, in seeing those kinds of scenes.
Well, and it's something that you can't understand Boston unless you understand busing, and you can't understand busing unless you lived it. That's what a friend of mine was saying to me the other night. She said, "How come nobody's ever written this until you?" And I said, "Because I lived it." You know, with all due respect, there's no other Boston author who's a contemporary of mine, who was living in those neighborhoods when that blew up.
Right.
And so all of my extreme, the other thing is people say, do you research? I don't need to research 1974, I was 9. You remember everything from when you were 9. I didn't anyway. I can remember what things cost, I can remember how things smelled, I can remember what things looked like, I can remember what people drove, I remember what people wore. It's all very vividly, you asked me what was going on when I was 35. Beats me, that's when I have to do the research. Like when Blackbird, the TV show I just had on Apple TV Plus, that was set in 1993 and 1998. It was 2 different time periods. The amount of research I had to do on that show was prodigious, because I was like, when did we start having cell phones and work? And one of my favorite moments in all of Blackbird is Greg Kinnear's character pulling out his cell phone, which was my first cell phone. I went and I got it for props, and then that he couldn't quite get it to work. And I remember that, that was constant back in 94, you know what I mean? You were like, no, you break it up, I'll call you from a landline.
That's how you get people off the phone you need by talking to them.
Yeah, that's true. I think as much as this isn't, again, autobiography, it is emotional and psychological autobiography. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to the television show too, but let's talk about TV. That's sort of, did working in television, obviously you're really good at it, and you became very much in demand to work on these shows.
Yeah.
And I would ask you kind of 2 things. One, is that really what took you away from novel writing? And how are the 2 different? How is writing for television different from writing a novel?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second question first. How is it different writing for a novel as writing for television? And this is going to explain a lot. Well, one of the hardest things I find, I'll give you a perfect example. From the book Live by Night, there's a scene in which Joe Kaufman walks into a hotel to meet somebody during the gala opening of that hotel, which was based on the actual opening of the Stafford Hotel in Boston in 1927. And I had news reports, I had everything I could find. He walks in, I have him move through a room of about this size. And as he walks, I describe everything around him so that you have a story, but he has to keep moving. That scene took me 2 weeks to write. In a script, it would be interior, ballroom, night. You're done. Joe walks through the room. Set designer deals with all that crap. So I find it far more interesting. Far easier to write a script. It's challenging in different ways because you can't fall back on interior monologues. You can't fall back on writing the scenes so that people get it. You have to show it, and it's all about juxtaposition of image. That's what scripts are. I had trouble as a novelist as time has been going on. It has been harder and harder for me to write. I think it goes against my general personality, which is far more. I'm not an introvert at all. I'm a social animal, and the first time I showed up I remember Boardwalk Empire. We were in Brooklyn, and I was standing at a water fountain, and we're talking about some gossip in the news, and I was like, water cooler conversation. That's what this is? I never knew it. I was locked in a room for 20 years. I like this. This is cool. So then I went out to LA and got kind of stuck there. And so I had to make do. I went to LA and my wife divorced me, so it was settling. I'm stuck in LA. So I had to make do, and I said, well, how do I survive? How do I figure this out? And it was a heck of a lot easier to figure it out through screenplays and getting steady jobs and getting this constant paycheck. Then all of a sudden, and what I realized in all of that was I was a better dad. Because novels take too much focus. They take me, I gotta go into a really dark tunnel and stay there. I could write a script of the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl. I could. I could. I can drop my kids. I can take them to school. I can make their breakfasts, pack their lunches, take them to school, turn around, come back, and write. I can't do that in a book. I have to stay in the space, the mental space of the book, or I lose it. So it just became more and more attractive to me to do this. And then when I ran a show, the last question was, can I do that? I'm terrified because the other thing I'm not is a micromanager. I have no micromanagement instincts in my entire body, which my wife and kids can definitely attest to. I'm the one who's like, did you see that plane crash into the house? And I'll be like, a plane crash? I don't, it's hard for me to focus on details. So I was like, I think most showrunners are micromanagers. What am I going to do? And then I just said, no, I'm going to trust my instincts. My instincts are hire really, really good people and let them do their job. It's all about trust and it's all about artistic ability. So I took a long time to hire people. I was very specific. I went through a lot of people for every single position before I would decide on them. I did the same thing when I cast the show. I cast every part as if it was the star, including there's a kid in the gas station in episode 5 who I adore. I'll work with him again in anything. And just because I wanted a great kid in the gas station. I just wanted a great kid in the gas station, because we need that in this world. So when Greg Kinnear goes and talks to the kid in the gas station, that's a damn good actor he's talking to. So, and
which show is this?
This is in Blackbird, sorry. In Blackbird, Greg Kinnear goes, he talks to a kid who works at a gas station and finds out that there's a local bait shop where he should go talk to somebody. And that kid is just a phenomenal actor. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you get the best actor to play the gas station guy? He needs the job. So that's how I do it. So I did the exact same thing with hiring set designers, artisans, hair and makeup. That's its own soap opera, by the way. Everybody. I just hired the best of the best. And then I stepped back. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Every now and then, I'd be at a production meeting, and I'd be like, no, we need to do that or that. But most times, I'd be like, yeah, looks great. Looks awesome. I hired an incredible DP, director of photography, who had never been involved in a large-scale production before. Her work was impeccable. And she shot the show the way I wanted it, which was, I wanted it to look like film. I wanted it to look like, not a TV show, I wanted it to look like a Terrence Malick film, like Days of Heaven or Badlands, and she got me that look. Yeah. So, and then when I realized, that's showrunning, and it pays kind of good. And here's the other final thing. When you write a book, when you write a book, anybody who's written a novel will know this, or tried to write a novel. There's nothing worse than the middle of a novel. It's when everything goes wrong. It's when all the mistakes of conception you made in the rush of coming up with the first act, where you were like, this is fantastic, and then you get into the middle and you're like, no, it's not. And you got to go through that journey. Me and Les Standiford, Blonde called it the Valley, Mike Conley too, the Valley of Darkness. It's the Valley of Darkness. And you got to go through it completely alone. And it's horrible. And it's horrible every time. I've written 14 novels, it's horrible 14 times. When everything went south on this show, and it did several times on Blackbird, I had 200 other people to commiserate with. It was great. I wasn't alone. I'd call out and I was like, that guy's an asshole. And they'd be like, yeah, he is an asshole. What do we do about him? And I'd be like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. And we won. And, it was just, I remember we had a COVID outbreak 2 days before shooting began. Massive COVID outbreak. It took out our carpenters. It took out our electrical unit, So we're absolutely in trouble. We're on this huge Zoom, and one of the most important people in the production says, well, I guess we all got to know what we've lost. We got to pack this in. My partner texts me, and did he just say? And I'm looking down at it. I'm looking at 140 scared faces on a Zoom. Everybody looks like they want to throw up. I want to throw up. And I said, I hired every single one of you, and I hired you because you're highly competent at your job. And the only thing I've ever learned as a writer is that when you face failure, which I've faced 14 times in 14 books, you just make it your bitch. You you stare it down and you beat it. And we are going to beat this because we are all incredibly competent people. And failure is not an option. And they broke into applause. And I went, I like this job. But I love this job. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll go back to writing. Well, I got a novel coming out in April, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not under contract for the first time in 25 years.
Wow.
25 years of contract hanging over your head.
Yeah.
That feels like freedom.
Yeah.
So
Maybe you'll go back and do it just
yeah,
because you don't have
I just
to.
want to feel it. I just want to feel it. I don't want to feel like I have to write a book. I just
Yeah.
want to feel I'm writing a book.
Yeah. To go back to Blackbird because it's just so amazing, and you gave me nightmares. But,
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's what you intended.
That was the point.
And you were talking about hiring the best people. I don't think I've ever seen Greg Kinnear be better. He was amazing in that show. Everybody was amazing in that show. But I wonder, before we turn to questions, which we're going to do in just a couple of minutes, if you can talk about the kind because you wrote this series, you wrote it yourself, beginning to end. It was your baby only. What was the origin of this story? It's an unusual story.
Yeah, Blackbird is based on a true story. How many people have seen Blackbird? All right, the rest of you, go get Apple TV Plus tonight.
Go home and watch
tonight. Like tonight, it's $5. Don't be cheap. $5. It's less than a book. And you get 6 episodes of quality television, plus Severance. Ted Lasso, come on. All right, so Blackbird is based on a true story. It's the story of, it was a book called In With the Devil, and it was based on the true story of a guy named Jimmy Keene, who was a convicted drug dealer in Chicago. He was a white-collar drug dealer. And when he was convicted, it was the first time he was ever even arrested, he was convicted for 10 years without possibility of parole and dropped on him like a ton of bricks. He was approached by the FBI. The FBI said, we've heard you on tapes. You get along with everybody. We're going to give you a very strange proposition. We would like you to transfer from your nice little cushy minimum security prison to the worst prison in America. Cozy up to a guy who we think is a serial killer and get him to tell you where at least two bodies are buried. If you do that, we commute your sentence. If you don't do it, you're stuck doing your time there. Jimmy only took the deal because his father, who was his best friend, was sick and was never going to make the 10 years. So he turned on a dime and he took the deal and he went into this prison and he befriended a guy named Larry Hall, who was suspected in killing upwards of 40 women. When they approached me about it, I said, I don't want to do this. I hate serial killers. I loathe prisons. My brother worked in a prison for 30 years. He'd be like, hey, you want to come in for research? I'd be like, no. No, not at all. Not at all. I listened to the book because Karen Ectolis, a friend of mine, ran Cinemax for years, said, please, just read it. So I read it. Right near the end, I thought, there's something in this book they don't know is in this book. And that's Jimmy Keene, who wrote the book with somebody else, has no idea where he is on the spectrum of misogyny and objectification, dangerous objectification of women. Larry Hall is the serial killer. Obviously, that's as far as you can get down that spectrum. But all men are somewhere on the spectrum. Could be the most benign place, but you're on it somewhere. And I wanted to look at that. I wanted him to go on a journey in which he understands. He's charged with his FBI handler says to him, you have to find common ground with this man. How do you find common ground with a serial killer? Right? Well, you do. You can. We don't like to think about it, but you can. And what do men talk about when they're together with other men? They talk about sports and they talk about women. That's where you start. And that became the journey that Jimmy goes on in this. The Greg Kinnear thing is great because Greg is wonderful in this part. And he, to me, is the positive masculine ideal. He doesn't follow a narrative. He follows facts. He is methodical. He is non-judgmental. He gets to where he needs to get. And he and I had this one conversation. He said, well, what can I do to give this any sort of color? And I said, I got an easy one for you. You hate Larry Hall, the serial killer. And he was like, oh. And I'm like, you never let it show, but it should be in every single interaction you have. You loathe it. And he was like, all right. And you see, when you watch the performance, you'll feel it. There's a moral rage just way underneath in his character. And you only see it, you see it flash once with Larry's brother, and you see it flash one other time in the confessionals, just for a flash. And he was wonderful. All the actors are fantastic in the show. So.
All right, before we go to audience questions, and folks, we have mics set up in the aisle if you have questions, so if you want to get up there, please do. But let me ask you the traditional, what's the next thing you're working on?
I'm working on my next project with Taron Egerton, who stars in Blackbird.
And he's terrific too.
He's terrific, and he and I are doing, I don't know if I can speak to the particulars of it yet, but he and I are doing another show for Apple TV, and we just got the green light. So we're setting up a writer's room, we're picking a location, which I'm not happy about, but
it's not related to Blackbird anyway.
It's not related to Blackbird anyway. We can't tell that story again. So, yeah.
All right.
Okay. Yes, please, questions, yes.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
We have a friend who has read everything you have written.
It's a fine man. She's friends well.
And she got me to read one of your books because up to that point I had read Zip on your books. So I picked out when we fell, just at random. And number one, I happen to be from South Hadley,
Oh, wow.
Massachusetts.
From South Hadley.
Number two, I work for Mount Holyoke College.
No way. Oh, my goodness. That's
So
good.
my question comes down, I don't remember seeing you in town.
You said you didn't do research.
I don't remember an arrest warrant of any kind down at the police station. So I know I don't remember seeing you in town. And where do you get your experiences? Did you actually show up in town? Were you partying up at the University of Massachusetts?
No. I mean, I know South Hadley because of the Odyssey Bookstore. And of course, yeah, the very second place I ever signed.
She's one of my tenants.
Oh, okay.
Because I run the Village Commons.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I've been to South Hadley a bunch because of that. It's the quintessential New England college town. It's gorgeous. You drive up there and you're just like, you drive up there in November and you're like, you want to weep. It's so quintessentially New England. It's so beautiful. And I've spent a lot of time in Western Mass, so I mean, I know it. I know the vibe. And yeah, I like that. It's an interesting thing. Since We Fell, the first 90 pages of Since We Fell are almost like an elegy to that part of the country, or part of the state. Since We Fell is a very interesting book in the sense that I'm glad I didn't end on it, because while I think it's well written, I don't think it's my strongest book because there's something missing in terms of my heart. And that's why I think this book works. If this is going to be my end, I'm happy to go out on this one because I feel like this book has something happens to me when I write about Dorchester and South Boston because I grew up there. I become a better writer. But thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that book. Thanks.
Love your books. 2 questions.
Sure.
And appreciate it, but I was born in Dorchester, St. Margaret's Hospital.
So was I, kid.
God bless you. Question number 1, how often do you get back to Boston? Question number 2, I've read just about all your books, and you have some very colorful characters.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Kenzie, Angelo Gennaro. Are these based on childhood friends, or amalgam or conglomeration of childhood friends, or people you...
Yeah, I don't base anybody on anybody. The only time I ever based anybody on a person, this just goes to show you. That's why I always tell people, when I tell students, don't base characters on real people, because A, you'll have them do what the real person did, which may not be dramatically correct. It just, and then B, they may recognize themselves and get their feelings hurt, but far more likely C, they won't recognize themselves at all, and you'll feel like an idiot, right? And hopeless. So this happened. I based one character my entire career on an actual person, and that's Helene McCready, the terrible mother in Gone Baby Gone. It's based on 100% straight down the line on a person. I'm at a signing one time. I look up, and that woman's in line. And I'm like, and she gets up, and I'm like watching her come, and it's like, she gets up, she goes, "Little Denny Lehane, how are you?" And I'm like, "I'm good, you know, and how you doing?" And she says, "I'm great. I gotta ask you one question." She's got a really loud doc voice, right? So I gotta ask you one question. So everybody's looking, you know? And I'm like, what is she gonna say? And she says, "He's gone, baby, gone." I'm like, oh dear. She says, "That Helene McCready character." I said, "Yes." "Where'd you come up with that bitch?" So there goes any thought of doing revenge writing, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know how well you know Dorchester. Did you leave Dorchester early, or?
2 years of age, so.
2 years what?
2 years of age.
Okay, so Dorchester is just a place, in Boston in general, but Dorchester is just filled with characters from one end to another. So when people say you have a really good ear for dialogue, yeah, if you grew up where I grew up, you'd have to be deaf not to have a good ear for dialogue, because everybody talks so vividly. And they're interested, and they italicize the strangest words in a sentence, and everybody's funny as hell until they're really scary. You get one or the other, you know. So yeah. But thank you. I'm glad you same Margaret, you know. Sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. Have you had a chance to walk around Eckerd this trip?
I didn't have a chance to walk around Eckerd. I walked around downtown St. Pete last night. It was wonderful.
Okay. Just a couple of questions. How many, after your first draft, how many drafts do you have after a typical book? And when do you find, would you say, is your best writing period? Like first thing in the morning, or are you a late night writer, or?
Okay, so I'm a 3-draft guy. Straight down the line. I'm a 3-draft guy. I never knew it. My publisher knew it, and my agent knew it, and never told me until very late in my career. They were like, "Yeah, it's the 3rd draft. That's when you always get it." I'm like, "Really?" So that's something that you should just feel if you're a writer. Please don't feel like you're supposed to get it on the first draft. The first draft is just vomit. It's sort of like figuring it. Get it all out there. Just get it out. It's out. It's out there. Figure it out. Then you start to kind of order it, shape it, and figure out what you're saying, and then you make it like look prettier. You know, like those are the drafts, in my opinion. Then, as far as I'm sorry, the other. When do I first write? I find that writing in the morning is excellent for me. Although I will say that for some reason I wrote most of Small Mercies very late at night. But I was staying in a really haunted mansion. I was in this big New Orleans, 7,000 square foot antebellum mansion in the heart of the New Orleans Garden District, and it was filled with ghosts. And I don't even believe in ghosts. So I would sit up at night in this creepy room, and I would write Small Mercies. So it was different, but mostly it's morning for me. 2 hours in the morning.
You spook yourself out sometimes when you're writing it?
I'll give you I'll tell you what happened. So I haven't watched horror movies in years. It's not my jam. My daughter, who's at the time was 11 or 12, said all her friends wanted to see this movie, The Conjuring, right? So I watched The Conjuring on a flight back to New Orleans, and it was the scariest friggin' thing I've ever seen. I was like a basket case by the time I got on a plane. And then I go and I forget that my wife has stayed back. I've somehow just not thought this one through. My dog is gone. Like this, the last few weeks I was in New Orleans, and I walk in alone to this haunted mansion with dusty mirrors all everywhere. Like you pass any room and you're like, "Who's that?" And then you're like, "Oh, it's me." And I was sitting up all night. So yes, I don't usually scare myself with my writing. I scare myself when I do stupid stuff like watch The Conjuring.
But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi.
How you doing, sir?
Hi.
So the whole history of in Boston, you know, integrating public schools not until 1974, which is obviously like, you know, way late, like 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954.
And it was 12 years after they had been ordered to do it. In 1962, there was a case, I'm blanking on the name of it, and then came the Hennigan case, which is what got them to actually enter.
So, you know, that's egregious, it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really interesting in the beginning, you said there was like a rage inside of you, you didn't realize what it was. So I think my question is, what triggered for you to write about that rage inside of you in Small Mercies? Was it the Trump era? Was it the George Floyd summer of 2020? What made you realize that, oh, I've got this rage and I need to get it out with Small Mercies?
I don't think I realized it. I don't think it was conscious, just so we're clear. It just started coming out. But was I seeing this? We have a return. We have people who are walking around proudly calling themselves neo-Nazis. Nazis. We fought a war to kill that. One of the biggest war in history. We have people, here's the thing, I grew up around white supremacy. It was everywhere. What I noticed over and over again was, if you're the future of the white race, we're fucked. Right? Every single moron who ever talked about white supremacy was done. And I'll put an even more personal thing on it. I had a very strong relationship with my late brother. He was, by his own admission, racist. And it was a very hard thing to grapple with. Very hard. Because this was somebody I love. I love a lot of racists. I grew up around a ton of racists. You have to understand how deeply entrenched it was where I grew up. And so, how do you reconcile that? They're great in every other way. They just happen to believe that blacks are inferior to them. Like, it's fucking crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and it's sickening, and it causes a terrible schism, because you do love these people. How can you love them and hate what they represent? How can you deal with that? So then the final step, I think, was my wife, I finally got it right, finally. Took 3 tries, but I got it. Third time's the charm. I'm married to an absolutely wonderful woman. She's my best friend. She is my everything. She's mixed race. She's half Nigerian. And her Nigerian side of the family is true Nigerian. They're from Nigeria. And I spent all my time with them, holiday times, etc. And they feel like the family I've been looking for since, I would say, I left my family's home when I was 20. It's the same vibe as my immigrant Irish family. It's the exact same vibe. They just happen to have a different color skin. That's it. Everything else is the same. In fact, we found the similarities between Ireland and Nigeria are endless. They love Guinness. They were screwed by the British. It's just endless, right? So it's when I look at those people, those proud, brilliant, several brilliant people in that group, doctors and educators and businessmen, and I look at them and I look at their children and I think, some asshole who can't even get a GED and is pumping gas somewhere in rural, wherever the fuck, is looking down on them? Fuck yourself. Like, I'm sorry, there's nothing else to say. So you see the rage is still there. It's coming up. Sorry, it's bubbling up. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have one more person back here waiting.
I appreciate your truth telling. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, final question.
Hi there.
Hi.
If I have something I can't not write, and I don't know, eventually I would like it to be a TV series.
Yep.
Not network. Am I better off trying to write it as a book and sell that, or to write it as a script?
If you're here, are you here in St. Pete?
All of my belongings are still in California.
Oh, no.
And
It's California.
That's too long a story.
California is where you'd have a shot.
Yeah.
As a script. It's really hard to sell a script outside of California. It just is. My career went from, I'd written for The Wire, I'd written for Boardwalk Empire, but I got to LA, and my career was like that. Just the ability to, my first job I got within 2 weeks, because I had lunch with a guy. if you can't do that, it's very hard to sell scripts.
And I love LA, strangely.
Okay.
I mean, that's my brand of weird, so I'm fine.
It's your brand of weird, so get back there. No, the only reason to write the book is so that you have IP, and then you control it. It's your intellectual property. If you write a book, you write it as a book, and then you get interest in it. You could say, hey, I'd like to write a script based off of this, and you control the IP. You could say, I'm not selling this to you, I'm just going to write a book, I'm going to write a script based on it, and I'm going to hold on to the rights to the book, and I'll make more money that way. That's one other way to do it. But I will say it's extremely hard to break into the television space unless you're there. But if you are there right now, man, like, stalking a writer's room is hard because everybody's got jobs. Everybody's got jobs. It's so hard. Like, I couldn't get the 3 best writers I know for my new show. They were all like, we signed a deal with Netflix, we signed a deal with HBO. I mean, everybody's just getting scooped up because there's so much stuff.
Content.
It's everywhere. So I'll end on this. This will give you a sense of what it's like in that industry right now. There was a conversation about releasing Blackbird for the Emmys. And Taryn really wanted it, our lead actor. And the question was, would we make that window? Should we drop it in just before the Emmys are announced? And Apple said no. They said, no, we don't think it's the right move. And we were a little bit visibly upset, and it was unfortunate. We wanted who doesn't want an Emmy nomination? Well, just before the Emmys, in a 60-day period, they released 130 television shows. 130 TV shows, and nobody knows any of them. I mean, it just shows. They had a show with Julia Roberts and Sean Penn, and nobody watched it. I mean, they were just dumping stuff. We got released in July, and everybody watched us. I was like, I like that. I don't need the Emmy. I like being watched. I like people knowing my show. So I would say there's so much product out there. They're releasing somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 TV shows a year right now. Run back there and see if you can get them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all of you very much. You've been a great audience.